Easy now. Papa got things making headlines.
Come down. Ooh, you make my high come down. Always tripping when you come around. I'ma have to cut you off, like right now. You see, I don't want to drive me. You can say that for your mama. Maybe you should smoke some. Me try the marijuana. I was never you good. The vibe was straight. Showed you a couple of things and they ain't finna change. I treated you right. Everything was a gift from.
Welcome to the Seahawks Man to Man podcast, powered by The Athletic. Shout out to the company. My name is Michael Sean Dugar. You guys can follow me on the tweet machine at MIKEDUGAR. As you know, I'm verified on there. Shout out to Elon Musk. Appreciate that. Also, subscribe on YouTube. Seahawks Man, the number 2 man on YouTube. We appreciate all the love and support on there. Chris, talk to him.
What is good, everybody? It's your boy, Christopher Kidd. Be sure to follow me on Twitter at CKIDD206, and that's CKid206.
All right, we're coming to you in the middle of free agency, but either way, with the free agent moves that is going to happen, we already know about the Draymond Jones signing, which is a great signing. Helps the front seven, but the front seven has been gutted lately on the Seahawks. You got Quentin Jefferson and Shelby Harris just got released. Cody Barton. He's off to DC. Puna, as of recording, is a free agent. See if that changes while we're recording. Guys like LJ Collier, free agents. Miles Adams is a exclusive rights free agent. Basically, can come back on a minimum deal. We got Brian Monet, tore his ACL in December. Short version, they need some guys up front. So Chris and I called up a guest to talk about these guys that they can acquire, specifically in the draft, as the Seahawks have a gazillion picks. So joining us on the pod this week, Diante Lee from The Athletic.
My guy, how you guys doing? Glad to be on.
Can't complain, man.
We are doing good. Happy to have you returning to the show
Yes.
for the second time. Gave us some great insights last year about the DBs that the Seahawks could potentially look at. And what do you know? They hit on Tariq, and maybe have hit on Kobe Bryant as well.
Right.
But nickel, we'll see. But this year, let's focus on the front seven. I know you know ball across the on every position, but I like talking ball with you about defense specifically. And I didn't know until I think we talked to the combine that you played linebacker at Sac State. I don't think I knew that.
I was a linebacker there. My position coach is now the head coach at Boise State, Andy Avalos. That was a guy who recruited me. So I like to say I learned from somebody who really knew it. And then my high school coach, his name was Ray Wells. He played for the Titans for a few years. So, you know, I've spent a lot of time hearing a lot about what a linebacker is and isn't supposed to be, which is probably why I end up being harsher on a lot of these guys that I probably need to.
No, that's all right, because linebacker is not a position that fans, obviously, I don't think fans know the intricacies of half these damn positions, which is fine. So I don't think naturally the broadcast on TV set them up to learn much. It tells them what's happening, but not why it's happening. But then the media, we don't really, people who haven't played, well, we know that much shit. So it's good to have people in the media who do know. I told you that, and Nate Tice that at the combine. I was like, you guys know ball, so I appreciate you. So, and the Seahawks need linebackers, so this is perfect. This is a perfect setup. So I want to, before we get into some of these guys they could target in the draft, I want to flash back a little bit to a piece you wrote last offseason. It's really great. Let me see the headline on this. It's how Pete Carroll's Seahawks defense is trying to catch up with the modern NFL. And it details the shift in philosophy from what was the bread and butter during the LOB days to kind of the Vic Fangio-inspired scheme that they were going all in on last season, which did not work. They just stunk last year in a lot of areas. So considering what you wrote versus what ended up happening on the field, what would you say was Seattle's biggest issue on defense with their scheme change?
I think part of it was the obvious walking in, right? Like when I think about the best versions of the style of 3-4 that they were trying to run, which is very zone coverage dependent, you might do a lot more on the back end than you would in other schemes, but it all does require you getting pass rush up front, especially along the edge. And going into the season, it was clear that was going to be a position of weakness for Seattle's defense. So I always start there. You think about how often quarterbacks are just kind of comfortable in the pocket. You think about some of the worst defensive performances that they had throughout the year. A lot of that comes from not being able to affect quarterbacks. And then you think about the defensive interior as well. It's hard to build a proper 3-4 defense in the NFL strictly for rostering issues. When we were in Indianapolis, one of my good friends, Justice Mosqueda, who covers the Packers for SB Nation, I was talking to him about that, because Joe Barry is also a guy off of this 3-4 tree that Seattle has kind of been dabbling with. And one of the things that he mentioned that Green Bay struggled with all last year is the fact that you just can't roster so many linemen to be able to run all of the personnel versatility stuff that you would like to, employ a 3-4-4. So, you have to have top end talent and you have to have a bunch of depth, I think, to get the most out of the scheme. And obviously the front 4, front 5 guys within this defense was going to be a major question mark. And I think that that's what kind of bore out over the course of the year, is that there wasn't enough on the interior to really stop the run at the first level. And then when teams were dropping back and passing, there really wasn't enough being done to affect the quarterback. So that way that zone coverage philosophy really could be maximized the way that it needed to be.
And that kind of matches the assessment that Pete had the day after the Niners lost in the playoffs. He kind of stepped back and was able to watch and was like, all right, we need to get more dynamic up front, which when I went back and was typing that up, I was like, okay, what exactly does that mean? I didn't follow up in the moment, but I was like, shit, I should have. Because if you think about that, is really vague, but I'll kind of toss that to you. You mentioned that it's hard to just find guys who can do all the things that need to be done up front. Specifically, what all like positional versatility do these D linemen need to have to make this thing really work?
So if you think just 3-4 like base personnel, what you need is a dominant nose. Well, what you would like to have is a dominant nose. There really aren't that many dominant noses. So I think usually what it comes down to is you just want a nose that can win at least half the time. You can usually kind of pick that up off the scrap heap in the NFL. That's really not the pressure point in my mind. The pressure point in terms of 3-4 fronts are the 4 eyes, the defensive tackles, the guys who you are really asking to take on those double teams. From a size perspective, you want guys that are like Ashawn Robinson's. When you think about the Rams 2 seasons ago when they won the Super Bowl, when they were having trouble stopping the run, you would bring in Greg Gaines and Ashawn Robinson, and now all of a sudden teams can't run the ball on you because you got Aaron Donald in there as well, and you're playing those odd fronts. You need guys like that, I think, to really be able to stop the run the way that the 3-4 kind of calls for, and what you want to do up front in terms of playing those split safety shells and having guys play a gap and a half or just eating double teams in general, so that way your linebackers can stay clean. Seattle didn't have that. That's something that, again, to kind of harp on that point, going into the season, it was evident that those guys were not there. Having guys that are heavier than 315 pounds does not necessarily mean that there are 4 eyes in a 3-4, right? And then from there, these are guys that you want to get some kind of value in terms of pushing the pocket, guys that can, crush a pocket. You think about Bill Belichick and his version of the 3-4. His defensive tackles are not the most dynamic in terms of quickness and 3 cones and short shuttles, but what they are technicians and guys that are really determined and have high motors and are able to affect the pocket that way, right? Being able to squeeze the air out from quarterbacks. So they were missing those factors. And then when you don't have that, what I'm really saying is that puts that much more pressure on the edges, and they did not have that either. So I think that by being more dynamic, I think that what he's saying is they need to be bigger, faster, and stronger, flat out. Up front. That's kind of what it comes down to. So I think that there are a few big body guys that kind of fit the billing in this draft. So I really wouldn't be surprised if he's kind of looking at this as a golden opportunity to get young guys that can kind of fit exactly what it is that they were missing last season.
I'm curious to hear your thoughts, because Mike and I have shared what we thought is the biggest issue defensively in the position group. So I'm curious to hear what part of the defense, what position group do you think needs the most immediate attention to get back to this Legion of Boom type defense where they have an elite pass rush, solid linebackers, and of course the corners doing what they do best?
It's edge rush. It's got to be edge rush. That's just the premium in the NFL, period, right? Where people fall on the pass rush versus coverage debate is just where they fall on it. The truth of the matter is that they're interlinked at the end of the day. You can have guys that get off the ball great and can bend on the edge, but if you can't cover guys, it's not going to matter. And the same thing, I watched, as an Eagles fan, I watched this team play very intricate zone coverages, and when you played up against good offenses that could actually hold up in terms of the protection, getting all this depth in your zones really doesn't do anything to affect the quarterback if you're not actually getting home, right? So those things are interlinked. And I think that in hitting, with Tariq Woolen in last year's draft class, you can kind of chalk that up as a victory and say finding a number 2 corner isn't necessarily the hardest thing to do, right? Back to the Philadelphia example, they were kind of able to fall backwards into James Bradbury because the Giants were looking to do some things with the cap, but you can find a guy who can perform at that level, right? Who can be, a solid second tier, third tier type of player that you can play zone coverage with, and you're not asking him to lock guys up man to man and things of that nature. You can find that guy. It's finding the top flight edge rusher that's really the issue. Because the best guys, the guys that are under 30 and most productive, they don't just come available, right? So it's hard to get those guys if you don't draft them. It's the same deal with quarterbacks, and that's why they get paid the way that they get paid. So I say that priority number 1 in terms of improving personnel here has to be getting an edge rush guy that is legitimately productive in terms of, pass rush production.
Perfect. And then I do want to look at another position that is of need. For example, Cody Barton, he has just not re-signed. He signed with the Washington Commanders. And although he had his struggles, I was waving the flag of he's getting better week in and week out. Obviously, when he started, it wasn't good. It wasn't pretty. But he learned week in and week out and got better as the season progressed. And obviously, he probably wants to get paid and wants to be a starter. I'm not sure that him coming back to Seattle, potentially being a backup to a veteran, is something that he wanted to do. With that being said, as a whole, when you look at this linebacker class, how strong is it? Is it strong? Is it weak? Is it medium? What is your thoughts on this class?
For me, it's hard to say. Like, I was in love with last year's linebackers class, and I think a lot of those guys ended up having a lot of growing pains. Chad Muma struggled, who was a guy that I was in on. Devin Lloyd had his struggles. That was another guy that I was kind of intrigued by. Even Quay Walker, who was a decent starter, had his issues, working in Green Bay. So to me, I would say that this class is not as good as last year's if you're just looking at raw talent, feel for the game, versatility. I will say that there are 2 guys that have legitimate star potential at the position, and I think that's Trenton Simpson and Drew Sanders. Those are 2 guys that you can sell me on pretty easily. Trenton Simpson is very obvious, right? He's sub 4.5 guy. He's got legitimate track speed. They use him very similarly at Clemson that they did with Isaiah Simmons. Taking however Isaiah Simmons panned out in the NFL is its own ball of yarn because they were playing him kind of out of position and they're trying to sort out what his fit is now. I think that Trenton Simpson is a little bit more of a natural linebacker than Simmons was. He was more of a safety type that they were playing near the box. And I think that's reflected in his play, right? You see a guy that's really explosive, that's fast, gets to the ball well, and that can play out in space and zone coverage. So I would not be surprised to see him being, high on Seattle's board. And then with Drew Sanders, if you need a guy that is a legitimate downhill thumper type, if you're getting downhill run, you got somebody who can take on a guard, take on a tackle, and go out and make a tackle, and be explosive in doing so. I think that's what Sanders' strong suit is. So there are 2 different types of guys. So I think it all kind of depends on where you want to leave your priorities in building the roster, right? A team like Cleveland the last couple of years, they want coverage guys. Houston, they wanted coverage guys at linebacker. If the issue is stopping the run on the interior, I would not be surprised again to see that Drew Sanders is somebody that they really have circled that you can maybe get late in the first round or early in the second.
Well, my next question was going to be, is he someone that's worth that first round pick? And you're hinting at he definitely is someone that could be that first round pick for the Seahawks if they wanted to get him, maybe let's say at 20 if he's available still, right?
I would say 20, how things kind of shake out. Obviously, I'm not sure. You guys know better than me the legitimacy of what they're doing in terms of shopping the number 5 pick or number 20. But I think if you can get a guy like Simpson or Sanders in that 20 to 25 range, that's great. I think the optimal range for them is maybe 30 to 35. But at the end of the day, the one thing with this draft that I am starting to notice or feel more strongly about as the weeks go on is that 1 to 20 to 25 or so I feel really good about. And then I think that there's kind of a significant drop off. So if you can get a guy that slides between Sanders and Simpson, if other teams are not in love with linebackers and you can catch him by trading down, then it's great. If you get him at 20, though, it's not a loss, and I don't think that that's necessarily an overdraft based on the talent. It has more to do with how I feel about the value of the position in today's NFL.
Okay. I do want to actually, I'll ask you that later, but you did mention Trenton Simpson out of Clemson. He is undersized, I guess, for the linebacker spot as someone that's only 235 pounds. He's not the biggest guy, but
Right.
he can move sideline to sideline. He has that 4.43 speed. What would he fit Seattle scheme, or do you think maybe a different scheme is where he would fit best and it's not in Seattle?
I would say he can fit if we're looking, if we're talking about it in the abstract, particular to Seattle's issues, which is kind of being able to handle things in the box. I would say the better fit of the two would be Drew Sanders.
Okay.
Especially because, Jordan Brooks, he plays up and down. That's kind of been the book on him basically his entire career as a starter. He runs kind of hot and cold, but I think that he's versatile enough and moves well enough to where that can be the guy that you can flex out. If you get those spread sets and you need a guy to walk out of the box so you can play your too high stuff, I think you could do that more readily with the Brooks if you have a guy like Sanders playing beside him. I think if you had Simpson and Brooks together, now you're looking at issues of, well, who is going to be our take on guards player? Who is going to be that explosive guy in terms of taking on blocks and making tackles inside the box when teams play heavy? Because you do got to deal with the fact that San Francisco is on your schedule twice a year. You're going to have to deal with the fact that Philadelphia is who they are in the NFC. Even Green Bay is a pretty physical, run first type of team, and they have Aaron Rodgers right there, and they've been pretty good with running the ball over the last few years under LaFleur. So I think that for them, knowing what's on your schedule and what issues they have in general with the roster, I would not be surprised if that's the tiebreaker between Sanders and Simpson, but I think you can make it work with either depending on what the priorities are. I would just say if I had John Schneider's ear, I would say the Sanders is probably the guy that gets their issues solved in terms of fitting the run solved much quicker than it would be with Simpson.
As I embrace my nerdiness in football and learn more about linebackers, one thing that has been standing out is the difference you mentioned with there's some guys who like when they're taking on blocks, they can get out the way and make the tackle, and some guys like you take on guys. Is that if you're one of the other in college, can you learn to be the other? You know what I'm saying? Like if you're a take on guy in your college scheme, can you learn the other one in the pros? You think, or are you just already you are?
I think you can. I do think that there is a level of kind of planet theory that's involved in terms of like your height and weight that has a lot to do with it. There's just certain guys you can be as physical as you want to be. I'm blanking on the names. A linebacker that played for the Titans for a bit that played maybe Rashawn Evans, I think is his name, right? And I think he was like a sub 240-pound linebacker, right? And he played as recklessly as he possibly could. One of the most physical guys that I watched through college and in the pros. But he's always dinged up, right? And why is that? Because you can only fly as 230 pounds into 315, 330 pounds so many times, right? Mm-hmm. So I think that protecting yourself, if you're a 255-pound guy like Drew Sanders is, those hits don't feel exactly the same, and I think that sometimes it can be difficult as a consumer, because I know when I was younger, I had a really hard time kind of embracing the idea that 15 to 18 pounds really makes that big of a difference. But when we're talking about taking that kind of impact, snap over snap over snap, it really does make a difference in the way the guys are built and how they play. I think has a big influence on it as well. So you can learn it. I think that your ceiling with it is ultimately determined by how much explosiveness you can get out of your height and weight. And with Sanders, I mean, it's very evident, right? I don't love the scheme that he played in, but I will say that for all the space that they made those linebackers playing in that kind of 3-high, 3-3-5 kind of stacked defense, he was able to play downhill and make a bunch of plays at or near the line of scrimmage because of how downhill he is. And I think that physical nature, it's easier to build on that than to take a guy who's a little bit more adept at slipping blocks and try to get him to be a take on with your hands, explode through your hips type of player. And Simpson is probably just not going to be best used as that in the NFL.
What's interesting about Drew in that set, it looks like he was 235 at the combine. Am I tripping? Did he just
maybe he cut? Yeah, he must have cut. Wait, I thought he might have been. Actually, I think you're right. As a matter of fact, I think that Noah Sewell might have been the only guy that was like 250 plus in this draft class. So that might just be a reflection of where the league is at, right? Like I think that's a reflection of where the league is at. I think that with Sanders too, the other thing, and some of this has influence, sometimes it doesn't. It all kind of depends on how much weight you want to put on it. I think there's an element of watching Sanders' game where you can look and see like, oh, I can tell that you used to be an edge rusher before you got transitioned to linebacker based on the physical nature that he plays with at or near the line of scrimmage. So I think that that's a factor as well, where you watch Simpson and it's like, okay, 20 pounds ago, you were probably a great safety. 20 pounds ago, you were probably a great nickel. I think that those are kind of the differences in play style. And I think that with a guy like Sanders, I think that he's athletic enough to be able to kind of make up whatever differences you might have in looking at Simpson's 40 time and trying to judge that against what you think Sanders' athletic potential may be. But I love the physicality that he plays with, or that he played with at Arkansas.
All right, we're getting into a little bit of bias here because Mike and I are graduates of WSU, go Cougs, and they got a stud out there in Deion Henley, who plays linebacker, and he's also, we talked about small guys in Trenton Simpson. This is also a guy that he's not big, but boy, is he's reckless, and he leaves it all on the field. Could he step in and be a starting will from the jump if the Seahawks were to say, you know what, we're going to take a risk on this young guy? We like the way he plays. Could he definitely come in and be a starter despite the size element?
An era ago, I would believe it. If Ken Norton Jr. was still the defensive coordinator, I think that would probably be the kind of guy that Pete Carroll would be, that defensive brain trust would be in love with. Sub 230, it's a large obstacle to get over for me personally. Mm-hmm. In the way that they like to play defense with those light boxes, like there are going to be snaps with Henley, no matter where he's at, where he's going to be taking on a tackle on outside zone, and that's going to be a really good dude. You got to think about the fact that some of the better tackles in the NFL are, you are going to have to see on the schedule, if not in the division, just around the NFC in general. And, that kind of downhill element of the game is going to be an issue for Henley, or a question that he's going to have to answer for sure. But when you watch the tape, there's plenty to like. That explosiveness that you talk about, it's evident in how he moves. He is one of those click and go type of players. When the ball is in the air, he is going to get there as soon as it's caught. If the ball gets out on the perimeter, he ranges well. I love that reckless, that kind of reckless nature that you talked about. He's a pretty good tackler for his size, which is, I think, a really nice feather to have in the cap for a guy that's coming in at sub 230. And at that weight, he's a legitimate 4.5 guy. And that's a major piece, right? Sometimes you get guys who are on the lighter end and then they run 4.6s, or they run like a high 4.6. It's like, all right, well, it's hard to get over you being smaller and not explosively fast. I don't think that those issues exist for Henley. There's a world in which it can work for him in the NFL. I think that that's probably more for a 4-down defense to figure out, though. I don't know if that's going to fit what they're trying to do with Clint Hurt here in Seattle.
Oh man, that burns, man. I want to see that here. Nah, I want it to fit though too. The last thing you have him come here and it doesn't work, and then
exactly.
You want it to work. Yeah, 225. That's bit. What's put in perspective the difference in the bodies is because when I got here they still had KJ and Bobby.
KJ, I was going to say KJ and Bobby. He fits in that mold.
Those guys are just so big. Like KJ, tall too, as well as big. Whereas Bobby, I think, is like 6 foot, or maybe something around there. He's not like a tall guy. Whereas KJ, KJ's both, and then Bobby is still built like a tank.
I'm saying Bobby is a thick dude.
Yeah. You put him next to Bobby is really good at like screaming and flexing his muscles after he gets a big play. So if you Google image Bobby, all of the pictures are him looking buff as shit.
Yeah.
So but then you see some of these other guys who are still buff, but like the difference,
you just different.
You didn't think the 15 18 initially, like that muscle difference or that weight difference was like a difference, like legit. It's like, nah, that's it really, when you watch these guys all come out the shower, you're like, oh, that's an old school linebacker.
Exactly. And this is today's linebacker.
Yeah, they're all hanging out together. Lockers are next to each other. It's like, okay, that's 245. That's 228. I can see it.
You can see it. It's legitimate. And that when you talk about longevity, being able to get through your entire contract, relatively healthy, those are real questions that you got to ask. Like with Henley, the selling piece with him is that he has legitimate speed and he's got a good wingspan, right? He's got enough length, and that adds to the range that he plays with, right? So that's the sales pitch. I just don't think that range and length in terms of the linebacker position are the problem. I don't think that that's the problem that needs to be addressed here. You need to, like I said, it's planet theory stuff that I think that you kind of got to approach building out this 3-4 defense with. And that's why usually, and you saw it around the league this last year, as more of the Vic Fangio guys kind of space themselves out across the league. If you don't have those bigger, faster, stronger types and you want to play all this zone coverage, and play more light boxes, it's really, really difficult to stop an NFL offense, snap in and snap out that way, unless you have legitimate pass rush. If there were legitimate edge rushers here, you had 2 Khalil Macks playing for Seattle, then you can do whatever you want with the linebackers, because the chances are the ball's only going to get there so often to really be able to threaten these guys. When you don't have those body types up front, it puts that much more strain on your second level defenders. I don't know if Henley is the fit for what they need to do in the upcoming years.
Obviously, when they draft a guy, you want him to fit. And right. I remember when the Seahawks took Shaquem Griffin, he was also someone that's undersized as a linebacker. He played at Central Florida, but in the NFL, weighing 230, it's tough. And they ended up actually putting him as a pass rusher, and he did okay, but it wasn't enough, and the Seahawks weren't able to keep him. Of course, we all know the story in that regard, but is that something similar where Deion could get drafted by a team and they don't see him as that starting linebacker, but maybe they figure, hey, maybe we can put you in the pass rush. You can use your speed and quickness, and maybe you can explode that way. Is that a possibility, you think?
It is a possibility. I would say like Griffin is a really good corollary to draw, because didn't he run like a 4.4 or 4.3?
He ran a 4.38.
Like, so we're talking like elite 95th, 98th percentile speed at the position, and he had to be moved. Right. That won't exist for Henley. It's not to say that he's slow, but you're not in that 95th plus percentile of speed at the position. And the last guy that was here that was like that had to be moved, to have a better role within the defense. I think that something like that could exist if you tried to draft a guy in a 3-4 that's kind of that size, is that you would end up probably using him more as a blitzer. Like I think about Patrick Queen. He's not the biggest guy. He's not the most explosive guy. And you think about some of the struggles that he had early in his career, and then you get Roquan Smith, and all of a sudden Patrick Queen looks much better. Well, how are they using him? More as a blitzer. He gets to be more kind of like the rangy guy, and you use Roquan Smith to do more of the physical stuff, because that's something that he excels at in spite of being a smaller guy. So, those are the kinds of things that I'm looking at, with evaluating linebackers, especially when we talk about fitting the 3-4 defense that I think NFL teams are trying to run.
All right, let's get into it. I want to hear your thoughts on this, because the ongoing situation regarding Georgia's defensive tackle Jalen Carter, who has been charged with racing and reckless driving stemming from that fatal crash involving a teammate and recruiting staffer early in January. The biggest question is, Mike and I have had this discussion. Diante, would you take him number 5 overall if you were running the Seahawks? If you were Pete Carroll in this scenario, he's on your board, would you take him at number 5?
I got asked something similar by my guys that work in Las Vegas radio for Sirius, Demon Carter, and I'll say the same thing here that I said there, and I hate saying it because it sounds so crass, but there is kind of a facing of reality that happens here, which is that, like, if this doesn't rise to the level of a felony, and at this point we don't have any indication to believe that it's going to rise to the level of a felony, that's a top 5 pick. It just is. I don't feel good about it. I'm not proud to say it. I do think that there is kind of some looking in the mirror that I think in the NFL, as part of NFL largesse, working in the media, that I kind of have to deal with when I get asked questions like that. But the truth of the matter is, this dude is what, 6'5", 320, 330 pounds, and probably would have run like a 4.7, 4.6 in the 40, This is a legitimate rare body type that we're talking about. Rare in terms of production. Somebody that fits exactly what the problems would be. Fix the problems that existed in Seattle over the last year in terms of having legitimate rare body types on the defensive interior. I don't think you can pass on that. I think that's one of those things where, as long as this doesn't get any worse, and if this run on quarterbacks happens the way that it looks like it might, if there is a lot of jostling and Arizona is able to trade out at 3 and another team comes up to pick a QB, if this guy is available at 5, I would have a hard time justifying not taking him. You're not going to get a guy, I think, after him outside of Will Anderson that is going to be as productive in the NFL that I'd expect Jalen Carter to be.
The NFL has a few things every once in a while that just tests our morality a little bit. Damar Hamlin was probably the biggest, most recent one other than Jalen. It's like, if you at any point, and it's okay if you thought this, because we all did at some point, if you ever thought at all, we're watching this guy like, so are they going to keep playing? Like, if you think about it, that's fucked up. But
it is. It's a reality, though. This is the way that this business works. It sucks to say, bro, but they don't get to be however many billions of dollars up by concerning themselves with the feelings of the public on issues of morality all the time. These are cold money-making types, and Jalen Carter puts butts in seats and wins football games. It just is what it is, you know.
We're not tuning in. It's really bad, like you said. It sounds bad. Like we don't tune into the game to make sure everyone gets out okay. We tune in to be entertained and win our bets and win our fantasy football leagues, and get paid as the media covering it. It's unfortunate, but it's okay.
Carter produces in all those ways. So, and like I said, and I do want to be realistic that, like, at the end of the day, if it is found that his involvement in this is no larger than him participating in the race, and driving recklessly up residential roads or down these kind of parkways or highways when he was in Athens, then I don't know if I were in this position, if I were in John Schneider's or any of these GM's positions, that I would wipe him off my board either. Taking it off of, putting the onus on me and taking it off of the way that I expect the NFL to act, I would probably behave in a similar fashion, and again, it doesn't feel great to say, but this is a rare opportunity to get, maybe a once in a generation player at his position. I don't know if you can miss out on that, especially if it becomes clear in the reporting, and obviously the Atlanta Journal-Constitution is on it. If it becomes clear in the reporting that Carter's involvement was that he was just doing some stupid shit in terms of racing, late night, but he wasn't inebriated, if he returned to the scene, if he's able to sort out not being honest with the police after the fact, and these NFL teams feel comfortable with it, top 5. At worst, he doesn't make it past Vegas at 7. He is going to be a top 5 to top 8 pick, no matter what, as long as this doesn't rise to the level of a felony and we don't get any more bombshell news about him between now and late April.
Let's say the Seahawks do become moral police and they say, we can't take a guy like that. Are there other guys, such as maybe Brian Brissy from Clemson or Siaki Ika from Baylor? Who are some other guys that you're saying, you know what, they passed on him, but this can definitely help this defense?
Brissy will be a guy at 20 if he's available that I think will make sense for them. That's a guy I've kind of been laser focused on in this kind of pre-draft process. Obviously the number 1 overall recruit coming out of Damascus, Maryland, went to Clemson while they're in the midst of competing for national titles year over year. So he's obviously a high profile signing for them. There was a lot of expectations. He was really productive as a freshman, and I think that at that point in time, I think that the reputation of a Clemson defensive lineman was still about as high as it could be, at that point in time. And then it never really materialized into him being that, first team AP All-American player that I think people would have liked for it to have been. Obviously, 2022 season, the family tragedy, with his sister, that obviously I think took some time away from him from football. And if his mind was not 100% on getting off the ball and striking blocks and making plays in the backfield, I would not begrudge him for that at all. I think it was pretty clear in the reporting how close of a relationship he had with his sibling. You want to be sensitive and empathetic to that. And then the year before, he's nicked up, has a few injuries, isn't really able to access that kind of explosive potential that we saw when he was a freshman. So I kind of had a lot of questions. And then he comes out at the combine, weighs out at 298 pounds, 6'5", and then runs a sub 5 second 40. I think he runs like in the low 4.8s. And that to me was like, okay, so the athleticism is legitimately there. So I can check that off and I can legitimately couch some of the issues that I might have had with his tape throughout his college career in what he was dealing with in terms of being nicked and bruised up, his sophomore year, and then dealing with the family tragedy this past season. And then you watch him move through position drills and you can see that smoothness, the ability to kind of change his pad level, to be able to sink his hips and still be able to move in and out. Stuff like that was really, it was really encouraging for me watching a guy like Bresee. So that's somebody at 20. If he's available, I would be happy if Seattle grabbed him. If I'm looking as an outside observer, that would make a lot of sense for me. Ika, I think that's probably, first of all, as a nose tackle, if you're not a Jordan Davis type, you're not a top 30 guy. To me, at that position, you got to be a really, really rare guy to get to be that valuable in the NFL draft. I think that if he's there in terms of, late second, early third, if he makes it that deep, that's a perfect time, I think, to grab a guy like that, because he can step in and be a starter and be an immediately productive player. Not going to be probably to the level of a Vita Vea. I don't know if he's that kind of swift of feet, but he moves okay for a guy that's 330 pounds. So I think that there's hope there that he can continue to be productive. So those would probably be the two guys in terms of defensive interior that I would really be circling for them. I don't have a lot of familiarity with Mozzie Smith, but from everything I heard from Bruce Feldman's Freaks List to, the way that people expect him to test at his pro day, that's going to be another 330 plus pound guy that's supposed to have these great jumps and be really explosive in his 10-yard split. That's somebody else I think that will fit what they're trying to do with this 3-4 defense. So those would probably be the three guys outside of Carter that I would be most interested to see, how Seattle feels about them as we get closer to the draft.
You did earlier in the show, you mentioned the Seahawks need to get that edge rush. They need some guys that can get off the edge and make plays. And the Seahawks made a move yesterday, or actually, it was yesterday, right, Mike?
Monday. Yes.
And that was Draymond Jones, played for the Broncos, defensive tackle. But they still had holes, obviously, with Shelby Harris being cut. Potentially, They could maybe re-sign him at a lower deal. Who knows? That's still up in question. And then Quentin Jefferson, Puna's still restricted free agent, and LJ unrestricted free agent, and LJ's also. But the Seahawks were able to land Jay Reed. He's returning to the Seahawks. Who had it first, Mike?
I don't know. I know our guy Jeff has it at the Athletic. So
okay.
Yeah.
So we'll go with Jeff.
Jay Reed back. Breaking some news on the pod here.
There you go.
Not live, so it doesn't matter, but yeah.
Jay Reed is back. So that definitely gets the defensive tackle position off to a solid start. But a concern you mentioned earlier is still the edge. So let's look in the draft. Who are some guys that you're like, okay, you know what? This is maybe second round, third round, because assuming that the Seahawks take Jalen Carr number 5, maybe at number 20 they go with Ika. All right, cool. So now we have edge rushers. Who are some guys that you think will be available that can help bolster this D line and get it back to where it needs to be to make a successful run in the Super Bowl?
So to me, I'm fascinated by Nolan Smith and how the NFL feels about him. Sub 240 pounds, but he ran a 4.3. So, you kind of got to sort out how you feel about it. You watch the tape. I don't know if anybody on the edge is as physical as a run defender as he is, and he's probably the smallest of the group. So that's there, and that's, I think, something that you can be legitimately intrigued by. So I think that if he's there in, kind of day 2 range, that's somebody that would fit, that you can bring in. And, if nothing else, he's going to have a high motor. He's somebody who can win with speed, and somebody that can actually provide value as a run defender on the edge, even as an undersized guy. So that's number one that I would be kind of into for them. So 2 other guys that I've really kind of been getting higher on as this process continues to move forward. One would be Isaiah Foskey from Notre Dame. I think that when you talk about a guy that just kind of checks off all the boxes, maybe doesn't have one elite trait, but can do a bunch of things, that's somebody in the day 2 range that might be intriguing, that you can use maybe to drop into coverage. He can be a good pass rusher. I think that his ceiling is probably best served as like a secondary rusher, but maybe he's not that top tier guy, but you don't draft top tier rushers in day 2 of the draft anyways, right? You try to bring guys who provide depth and can do a bunch of different things for you. And in a similar vein, I think Byron Young is a guy that might be a round 3, round 4 guy. He came out, ran a sub 4 440, if I remember right, or sub 4 540 at 250 pounds. You turn on the tape, he's like a tenacious run defender, and they didn't even really use him at Tennessee in a way that allowed him to kind of pin his ears back and get after the quarterback. You still see a little bit of that production for him. He's a bit older. I want to say he was a 6th-year senior, and I think he's dealt with some injury concerns as well throughout his career. And I think he was a junior college transfer too. So, there is, some questions to answer, which is why I would say he's probably a round 3, round 4 guy. But if you can get a guy like that, that adds some depth and some more versatility for you on the edge. And I think that that's going to be just as important for them as getting top line talent, because there's really not much of that outside of, the obvious names in terms of Will Anderson, Tyree Wilson, and Miles Murphy, and maybe Lucas Van Ness, depending on how you feel about him in this class.
Perfect. Okay.
One thing that interests me about the class, and this is me putting my nerd goggles on again, is it does seem there's like almost like a divide. There's like the outside linebacker natural guys who are smaller, guys like Will. I think he was like 230 something. BJ, how you say Ojulari?
Ojulari, yep.
From LSU. Will McDonald. Nolan Smith, like you mentioned, small guy. But then there's like the other side, like Tyree Wilson, I think was like 280.
275 for Lucas Van Ness. I think Miles Murphy is in like 270 pounds.
Yeah, I think the kid, what's the kid from USC? Tuli
Pelotu. I think he is 265, 266. So another bigger edge type.
Yeah, is there one flavor that fits what Seattle needs more than the other? A Nolan Smith faster maybe guy like Will Anderson, or a guy like the Iowa kid Lucas or Tyree Wilson, maybe a bigger guy. Is there a flavor that fits best?
Conventional thought is that the 270 plus guys, that's like your very old school 4-3. Like when you think about, I always kind of go back to early 2000s Tampa Bay, right? That Tampa 2 style of defense. And I think that this is reflected in what some of what San Francisco likes as well. They just happen to find guys that are good enough to be able to play as 4-3 edges while not being 270 plus pounds. But I think the thought process is still there. Those are usually 4-3 ends because you think, he's going to be taking on tight ends. He's got to be a run defender. You're not dropping him in coverage. So you want him to be a little bit more of a thicker body type. 3-4, those are usually your 250, 240 pound guys because they might be dropping out in the coverage. You might have them doing some different things. If you're a bare front team, which obviously Seattle has been, familiar with at different points in that Legion of Boom era, you can use smaller guys, and kind of use a bunch of twists and slants and stunts and things like that to be able to get those guys free or give them angles on players or offensive linemen and tight ends that will be bigger than them. So to me, if you're trying to sell, if you wanted a sales pitch for a guy who might be not as high profile but could be productive, I think BJ Ojulari would be another name that I hadn't mentioned yet that there will be some interest in. He's one of the younger guys in this draft. I don't think that he's turning 21 until next month or later. So, in an era where you got all these COVID hardships and guys are coming in 24, 25 years old, I think to get a guy that's 20 years old, got extremely long arms, plays pretty athletically, is a pretty good run defender, has a good motor. He wore that number 18 in LSU, so that'll let you know that he's got some leadership qualities to him. If you know something about the history of that number for people who play up front for the Tigers, that to me, I think kind of speaks well to what his potential can be. So that's another guy I think that you might be able to grab day 2. And maybe he's not there right now, but off his age and his athletic profile, you can certainly paint a picture of a guy that can turn out to be a really, really productive edge rusher going forward if he hits his ceiling.
Yeah, and that divide has become, not, I don't want to call it divide, but that just kind of the different categories the body types fit in has become more interesting to me as I've covered Carlos Dunlap's last year here in 2021, where Carlos essentially was like, yo, the Bengals switched schemes. And then he was like, all right, get me out of here. Get to the Seahawks. And they're like, hey, Carlos, we need you to drop sometimes. It's like, well, hold on.
Right.
I've been in the league this long kicking ass because I can go forward, not backwards.
Right. And I mean, and Dunlap is like a power forward. Like he's like 6'8", 200.
Yeah. He reminds me of Tyree Wilson a little bit, just how
very much so.
And long those guys are. So I've been kind of interested in like how some of these guys fit with that because they're gonna have to drop. Like they're just going to have to do it. It just frustrated Seahawks fans to them to play the Rams and to see Carlos Dunlap being the nearest defender to Robert Woods. I'm just like, okay.
It shouldn't be that way, right? Yeah. In your head, you look at that and it's like, there's just something wrong with that picture.
Yeah, Chris, what game was it? Was it the Steelers? Yeah, they had Benson Mayowa in the flat.
Yeah, guarding Najee Harris. And I tweeted, I said, I'm sure this is not what they draw up. There's
when
no way in
when
hell.
you draw up your NFL defense, I don't think that you put those diagrams together with the thought process that bodies like that would be guarding running backs and tight ends out in space.
And at the time, I think Benson was either tied or he was leading the Seahawks in sacks. So see him in coverage.
Right.
I'm thinking, why are you putting him back there? That is not something he is really good at. Is he good at it? He might be okay, but you're trying to win a football game here. Let that man rush the passer.
Exactly.
Right. Yeah,
exactly.
It's not even if he's good or bad. It's like that's not why he's been in the league.
Not the best use, right? It's about best use.
Yeah.
You're not paying an edge rusher to drop in coverage unless that's like a legitimate feature of his game, or you would like to avoid that whenever you can. So, that to me, I think is legit. And that's where, coming back to what you were saying, Mike, that is why I think you see such a stark divide in the body types of what you consider an edge rusher, right? Because of that. You don't want a Lucas Van Ness dropping into the flat. You want a guy like that to be powerful, to use his 270 pounds to go crush a pocket. Same with Myles Murphy. Is he athletic enough ultimately to drop into coverage? Maybe. But is it the best use of the player? Probably not. And I think if we were to see Seattle draft a player like that to be a full-time edge rusher, that to me would signal that even within this 3-4 philosophy, they might be a little bit more amenable to running more 4-down structures, right? It might be that 2-4-5 type of personnel where you still got your 2 inside backers and your 2 outside backers, but you don't have a nose tackle covering up the center, right? You see that a bunch anyways. That's usually how these teams play their nickel packages. So maybe they, if you saw something like that, that might signal that, hey, they might want to be one of those teams that plays nickel to everything. Right. You want to play with more speed on the field on the back end and play with bigger bodies up front.
Yeah. And the Seahawks did try some of that. Some of that. I did that quite a bit last year. I think that was where they were getting pounded a little bit.
Right.
On the run with that, like you mentioned, those lighter boxes. And then you had what's been interesting. I'm curious what you think about this. This is something I haven't planned on asking you, but like it does seem like that if more teams are going to go light box, we're going to slowly see like the reemergence of the fullback.
100%.
I think of that Raiders game where the Seahawks gave up a bazillion yards to Josh Jacobs, like quite literally the best Josh Jacobs' life. What's their fullback's name out there? Oh, this is gonna bug me. Is it
I can
Jakob?
see his face.
Yeah, it's Jakob. He's German, I believe.
Mm-hmm.
Jakob Johnson. Let's go with that.
That is him. Yeah, I'm pretty sure.
Yeah, like if I was Josh McDaniels too, like, oh, you guys going with these light boxes, huh? With these little 240-pound linebackers, that's cute. Here's my guy named Jakob. I'm gonna put him right here next to Josh Jacobs and run it down your throat.
I mean, you don't have to look outside the division to see that, right? Like, that's why this Shanahan offense is able to live in the way that it does in a modern NFL, because he can legitimately say, hey, you want to play with light bodies? That makes sense. We've got a George Kittle who is one of the fastest, maybe not the fastest player at his position, but is a legitimate tight end. We have, Kyle Juszczyk, who might be undersized by typical fullback standards, but can legitimately block like a fullback. And we can get these 2 tight end sets. We can get into these 2-back, 2 tight end sets where you still have to legitimately be worried about where the ball is going. And we can always just get into mash your face in mode, and you're going to have an answer for that. And I think that's a real kind of identity issue that we're going to see a lot of these NFL teams dealing with in the coming years, is just how much commitment you can have to playing fast when offensive guys can still get athletes that are 6'4", 6'5", 6'6", 250, 60 pounds that can play tight end. You still got to deal with your Evan Neals as an offensive tackle, not even the best guy in the league, but is legitimately 6'6", 6'7", and 325 pounds that can really move bodies, right? Like, those are the things that you got to kind of contend with. And I think that's why you're going to see so much of a cyclical nature in the league, because as teams try to prioritize and emphasize speed on defense, the natural response for offenses is to condense, get bigger bodies, and really try to move the ball back downhill instead of in the air.
Yeah, it goes back to quote a great East Oakland orator named Marshawn Terrell Lynch.
Yes, sir.
No one wants to deal with that shit over and over and over and over again. Yes. There are 17 regular season games. If your team is fortunate enough to make the divisional round, you probably are playing game 19 or it's game 18, one of the two if you had to bye. Man, that is tough.
Yeah.
Ask that 235-pound linebacker to keep taking on pulling guards for the fourth.
In the cold. Your most important games are in the cold, man. After you played, hundreds of snaps, if not 1,000 snaps in the season, man. It's tough. It's a lot to ask.
Yeah, so I'm very fascinated by that. We're talking a lot about body types, which is important though, as I mentioned, given the context of the team. Body types are gonna start. It's been interesting to see, like if the linebackers get smaller, all right, we getting these big ass fullbacks and guards. We go back to linebackers starting to look like Bobby and KJ again, or like how big is Jack Campbell at Iowa? Like 250.
I think he's 250. He's one of the few guys that crossed that 250-pound threshold at the position.
Yeah, so we see more guys like that, and like it's all cyclical. It's all
exactly.
There's a. I remember Sean Desai was now the defensive coordinator at the Eagles. Worked with the Seahawks last year. Something he mentioned to me last year when I was talking to him about the Legion of Boom and the impact they had across the league. He was like, look, defense is about just finding the answers. Whatever they do, just have an answer for it.
Yep.
You know? And ideally, you have an answer before they beat you with it. But even then, just find an answer.
Find an answer.
What it is, find the answer, and you'll be all right. I can see why he's a smart dude too. I can see why they call him Doc.
Right.
He's a smart dude. Sounds like
yeah. No, I mean within that, to kind of go off of what you're saying is you find the answers for certain things with the knowledge that you can't cover everything. You can't stop everything with one call, which is why having bigger, faster, stronger bodies in positions where you might be vulnerable becomes that much more important. Those are your get out of jail free cards,
Right.
That's what allows you to be able to play light boxes is because you have confidence in your front pieces to be able to handle playing a guy short in the box and still be able to fit the run, and still be able to affect the pocket without blitzing and things like that. That's what it comes down to, man. Like the game is complex, but the philosophy of it is relatively simple. How you solve problems is usually a simpler proposition. I think that people assume it's just the tactics behind it. I think kind of that's where you get those cascading effects of, all right, well, if we're doing this, that means we have to have these bodies. And if we have these bodies, that means we need to have these personnel packages. And how do we handle X, Y, and Z? But it all comes down to core philosophies of taking away what offenses do best and having dominant pieces to be able to handle matchup issues, in places that you can't cover for.
Yeah, no, the Legion of Boom was such a great example of that. You need an answer up front, Michael Bennett. He can do everything, Oh, you need an answer to in the back end, Cam Chancellor. There
exactly.
You go. Yeah, Cam can do anything, can run, play the pass, the tight ends were giving him an issue there for a little bit, but just in general, it was just, he number 31, the big dude with the visor on. That's our answer to whatever these guys, when they want to put a fullback out there, they want to do whatever, they want to spread it out,
Right.
We got an answer. So yeah, I appreciate this insight, man. The Seahawks need so much help.
No problem, man.
That it's so much like Pete Carroll. You can tell he gets frustrated with some of our questions because they're so surface level and they're missing the point because we don't have an understanding of what they're trying to do. So we ask things like, "Do you need to go back to 4-3?" And then Pete's like, "Well, no, that's not really the issue. We just need." And that's why eventually was like, we just need to be better.
Yeah. It's simple,
Yeah.
Occam's razor, man.
Yeah. Be better and we'll win more games. It's like,
exactly.
You're right.
Good football players win games, man. That's just what it is.
You need an answer.
Level.
Nick Bosa, you need an answer. Aaron Donald is your answer up front at the end of the day. Shane Waldron, the OC of the Seahawks, always says, this is a players' league. The league's about players. He says that every week because he's right. He's all scheme up all you want. Player don't
have the guys. You gotta have the guys.
Guy don't make the block. Whatever. We go on and on, man. But Chris, you got anything else before we get Diante out of here?
No, I want to thank you for the insight, man. We really appreciate it, especially someone that's played the position. That it always helps out. So thank you again, Diante, for making me smarter, as Mike would like to say, making me smarter on the D line, linebackers, and what the Seahawks should look to do come the 2023 draft, which is what, about 40 days away?
Yeah,
basically.
I'm not doing math on the show. I mean, that's
you
got to plug Twitter. You got the articles coming out.
So you guys I can be followed on Twitter at Diante Lee FB. As far as things that I'm working on, obviously this is the most busy time of the year for me. We're working on a big draft project that I think, we're going, by the time it gets presented, think similar to what the Athletic did with the World Cup. That's something that we're working on, so that's something that we're really, really excited about, that we're, kind of in the process of making all these preparations for. So that way our audience and fans alike can, go to the site and get something that's informative, but brief enough to where you can move from one player to the next and figure out why it is that your team is interested in them and why these guys are being rumored of being top 5, top 10 first round types of picks. So that's something that we've got going on to start with. And then for me personally, usually just talking about what the trends of the league are, best defensive players, the usual stuff. So this will be a busy time for me. So people will be hearing from me plenty over the next couple of months.
I'm going to plug one more thing before we get you guys out of here. We didn't talk about him because we kept it mostly front seven, but Diante has a good piece on Brian Branch, the do-it-all kind of defensive back from Alabama that I like.
You.
Yes,
Thank you.
That piece got me in. I was like, I was clicking on the clips you had in the links in there. I'm like, oh, wait a minute. Hold on.
He can ball.
Yeah,
he can play. He can play.
There's something to, I don't think it seems like Bill Belichick's going to take him. He's going to be like,
I doubt he'd be there by 20, but he's a really good football player.
Very good. So I need you guys to check this. Brian Branch, Diante Lee, the Athletic. Google it. Boom, it'll pop right up. So Diante, we appreciate you, man.
Thank you all
for the insight. We appreciate you guys for tuning into the Seahawks Man to Man podcast, YouTube, Spotify, the Athletic, Apple. Appreciate the love and support. Hit that subscribe button if you haven't already. Thank you again, Diante. On that note, guys, we're out.